It is declared to be the legislative purpose of this act and the public policy of the state of Mississippi that there be established and developed in the public interest an educational television and radio system, which shall provide educational and instructional, professional growth, and public service programs for the students and citizens of Mississippi to be known as Mississippi Educational Television. The legislature, therefore, declares and determines that for these and other related purposes, there is hereby established an agency of state government to be known as the Mississippi Authority for Educational Television, which shall have the responsibility for the administration, operation, control, and supervision of educational television and radio in Mississippi. So began House Bill No. 78 in 1969, and with its passing and the appointment of William R. Smith as executive director of the agency, the story of public broadcasting in Mississippi began. The serious efforts toward making educational television in Mississippi a reality had begun in the early 1960s with the formation of a state committee on ETV, chaired by Dr. John K. Bettersworth, author and Mississippi State University professor. Grants were obtained over the next few years for Mississippi Authority for Educational Television, Mississippi ETV, but the funds ran out as equipment was purchased. In 1967, there was a groundswell of public support from individuals and such groups as the Mississippi Federation of Women's Clubs, who wrote letters of support and resolutions. Joint efforts of those citizens and the ongoing work and determination of the legislature led to the Mississippi ETV opening day on February 1, 1970. The fanfare began that stormy Sunday at noon with facility tours and concerts, and continued with a panel discussion in the afternoon. The ribbon-cutting party included Governor John Bell Williams and Dr. Bettersworth, now Vice President of MSU, as well as the President of the Mississippi Federation of Women's Clubs. Excerpts from several shows were available so that attendees could see what type of programming to expect. The station went on-air live for the first time at the 6:00 p.m. conclusion of activities. In the February 8th edition of the Clarion Ledger, there was an article written by one of the tour guides about the day. It included this description: "The rain, hail, and wind descended on the opening afternoon of ETV. It looked as if all of the elements had ganged up against them. It didn't matter. Business people, teachers, parents, children, students, and just plain people braved the weather and came to see what it was all about." It was an exciting time for METV and for the viewers. There were approximately 30 hours of airtime per week, 5 to 10 p.m., Sunday through Friday. Shows being used for official school use had not been approved at this time, but, quoting, "Plans are to present children's shows and general cultural, educational, and informational programs and series." National shows that were available to METV viewers included Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and The Electric Company, with Mississippi's own Morgan Freeman starring. And within 6 months, Sesame Street was aired as well. The METV studios were continually busy producing shows that addressed such topics as space and planets, learning the metric system, reading readiness, and even money management. As the education department expanded, METV shows were utilized in schools, and as time went by, corresponding materials were produced to be used within classrooms. Based on the purpose assigned to METV in House Bill 78, the staff undertook programs to educate and enlighten adults as well. The first major production along these lines was A Season of Dreams, in which Jackson's New Stage Theater actors performed works of Eudora Welty. These were filmed in METV studios in 1971. Mississippi ETV was ahead of its time in many ways, and in 1974, 2 series produced by Ruth Campbell, one of the first African-American female lead producers in Mississippi, were aired. Faces featured notable people from minority groups. On A Conversation With, Ms. Campbell interviewed a plethora of famous politicians, religious figures, civil rights leaders, artists, and authors over several years. Among her guests were Pearl Bailey, Billy Graham, Dr. Kenneth Clark, and Margaret Walker Alexander. In later years, that series was renamed Conversations and continued with other producers, airing interviews with well-known Mississippians. 1976 saw a change of leadership when Lee Morris, who had been on staff as Director of Engineering since opening day, became the new Executive Director. A flagship production for MPB came about in 1976 with the Children's Television Theater. A 6-part production based on fairy tales which were dramatized by puppets, the handiwork of Mississippi's Peter Zapletal, this series was narrated by Burl Ives. The puppets are now lent to museums for special events from time to time, and they are on permanent display at Mississippi Public Broadcasting as an important part of its history. The year 1977 saw significant growth in coverage of new topics. MPB produced a documentary on watercolor artist Walter Anderson, with popular actor James Best playing the lead role. The Islander was filmed on location in Anderson's hometown of Ocean Springs, and music for the program was composed by Luigi Zanninelli, composer in residence at the University of Southern Mississippi at the time. In addition, Farm Week, MPB's longest-running show, was added to the lineup in 1977. It is Mississippi's oldest and only locally produced agricultural television news show, and is produced by the Office of Agricultural Communications for the Mississippi State University Extension Service. 43 years later, it is still airing. And fitting solidly in the mission assigned to MPB to provide public service programs, Quorum, a long-running show on legislative issues, also began during this season. It ran as a political talk show up through 2012. Other noteworthy productions of the 1970s included A Bayou Legend, Peter and the Wolf, Faulkner, and Good Morning Blues. Job Bank, with the infamous voice and rhythmic nuance of Jack Schweitzer, won an award from the Mississippi Employment Security Commission for its value to Mississippians in the job market. Among the shows being produced for children, Pennywise was one of the best known. It began in 1980 and was billed as an economic series for 1st to 3rd graders. Each show employed a puppet section and a dramatization, connected by mock commercials which featured Bernadette Stanis, known for playing Thelma in the CBS show Good Times. As the character Pennywise, she starred in various roles to introduce or reinforce concepts. In the early 1980s, approximately 1,000 schools were utilizing MPB programs in their classrooms. The local Educational Advancement Project, known as LEAP, had recommended, number 1, statewide educational TV network be established, and number 2, a color TV be required in each elementary school classroom. As MPB had met the first recommendation of the project, parent organizations and schools strove to fulfill the second. And the work was succeeding. In 1980, MPB received the Corporation for Public Broadcasting's top award for instructional television and was a runner-up in cultural programming. Also given to the station was a coveted Peabody Award for enhancing the educational system of the state of Mississippi through the innovative use of television. In April of 1981, more than 250 public television affiliates throughout the nation broadcasted the 30-minute documentary Passover, which starred Ed Asner. As was stated in the archives of the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, producer of the television show is the Mississippi Center for Educational TV of Jackson, Mississippi, which has one of the top reputations in the country for instructional television. What is arguably MPB's most beloved show was first produced in 1983. The TV production crew went on the road all over the state, and Mississippi roads shone a spotlight on events, towns, stores, and all things Mississippi. Visiting places such as the site of an archaeological dig in Greenwood, a Jackson Mets baseball game, and the Noxubee County Library, which was once a jail, the series was penned as a travel magazine-type documentary that featured many places of historical and common interest. The show in its earliest form ran through 1994. The early 1980s saw development of the next step, public radio. Though mentioned in House Bill 78 as part of the plan, there was much research to be done and many legal hurdles to navigate to bring it to fruition. Public Radio in Mississippi, PRM, was established in 1983 and began preparing studios and hiring staff. And so 14 years after MPB hit the airwaves, PRM followed suit in 1984. The radio department was first housed in the university centers on the same campus as MATV, though not in the same building. Executive Director Lee Morris stated that the programming would be 70% classical music, with the remaining time a mix of public affairs, jazz, blues, bluegrass, and radio drama. One of the longtime MATV jewels that began in 1985 is known as the Radio Reading Services. RRS utilizes volunteers from the community to read on air or to record newspaper articles, periodicals, and even books for print-impaired citizens. Mike Duke, who began at MATV in 1988 and was instrumental in developing this program, remains the director of Radio Reading Services. MATV videographers made a trip to Parchman Prison in June of 1983 to tape a concert given by Mississippi's blues artist B.B. King, which aired in December of 1984. B.B. at Parchman Prison was the first simulcast of MATV and PRM. 31 years later, in May of 2015, MPB completed the story of the blues master by providing live TV coverage of the funeral held for him in his hometown of Indianola. Many around the world viewed the funeral via MPB's web stream as well. Another MATV hit came along in Tomes and Talismans, a popular 13-episode series that aired in 1986. The series takes place in the distant future when all humans have been evacuated from Earth and a group of returning children stumble upon the last remaining library. They rely on the Dewey Decimal System to uncover information. As with many programs of this time, educational materials in conjunction with the show were developed and made available to teachers. In 1988, the reins changed hands again as Jody Jager became MATV Executive Director. Mr. Jager had been on staff as a TV producer for several years. In 1988, a show produced by MATV and broadcast in 13 southern states was Gardening Southern Style, which featured horticulturist Felder Rushing. In the early 1990s, specials featuring Rushing and a guest teaching about English and French gardens were filmed on location. Looking back over the 1980s, MATV staff could see several remarkable areas of growth. It was during this time that coverage of the Governor's Arts Awards ceremony began, as well as the international ballet competitions held in Jackson. The Arts Awards ceremony coverage continues even now, and with the State Spelling Bee and Poetry Out Loud, it rounds out the 3 annual events broadcast by MPB in the first quarter of each year. Through the years, there have been several very successful partnerships with other state agencies. One of these began in 1990, when the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks approached the administration with the idea of a show featuring outside life in the state. Thus, Mississippi Outdoors began and became another long-running MPB show. Larry Miller knew the industry from the standpoint of Deputy Director of South Dakota Public Broadcasting, and in 1993, he began his tenure as Executive Director of MATV. During the 1990s, MATV turned attention to some notable Mississippians with specials on authors, such as An Evening with John Grisham and An Evening with Willie Morris. The life of Senator John Stennis was captured in a documentary, as was that of Oxford, Mississippi author and physician Arthur Guyton. Dr. Tick-Tock was a co-creation of puppeteer Peter Zapletal and Diane Hartman. Tick-Tock Minutes began airing in 1995 and included kid-friendly information on health and safety, good manners, patriotism, and communicating with others. Tick-Tock Minutes won both a regional and a national Emmy Award, as well as a Parents' Choice Award Silver Honor, among others. Also premiering in 1995, the award-winning documentary Richard Wright, Black Boy, was a full-length production of MATV in cooperation with BBC about the life of author Richard Wright. Mr. Wright was born on a plantation near Natchez and overcame a childhood of oppression and poverty. This documentary continues to be seen at various times, both on MPB and other public broadcasting stations across the country. The Education Department of MATV continued growing and changing with the times. In 1995, it took off with renewed vigor with the launching of Mississippi Interactive Video Network, or MIVN. which allowed a teacher in one location to instruct a class hundreds of miles away and was free to all Mississippi students. Thus, a classroom in the small town of Salis, who might not have had a Spanish teacher, could be taught by someone in Tupelo. This crucial work continues today, now known as the Digital Education Network, or DEN. PRM had not to date had a news department, but in 1998, the first public broadcasting news department in Mississippi signed on. The ever-popular series Mississippi Roads had been on hiatus, but in 1999, it returned with Walt Grayson as host. 21 years later, Walt is still taking people to Mississippi festivals, restaurants, campgrounds, cemeteries, schools, and more, and viewers just can't seem to get enough. Recently, podcasts of Mississippi Roads have been developed as well, using excerpts from episodes. And Mississippi Roads can now be seen nationwide on American Public Television's Create channel. A far-reaching undertaking for METV in 2000 was the Right from Birth production. The series of 12 half-hour episodes was developed from a parenting guide by Drs. Craig and Sharon Ramey and Dr. Kyle Pruitt, and it was hailed as a groundbreaking series on parenting and literacy. It led parents and caregivers through a child's life from birth to 18 months of age, giving advice on how to prepare their children for a lifetime of learning. Soon, the conversion to digital technology was all the rage in broadcasting. METV led the way, being the first entity in the state to complete the conversion in the year 2000. The Mississippi Museum of Art in Jackson began a series of exhibits from places around the world. In March of 2001, a grant from Gertrude C. Ford Foundation provided the means for METV to produce programming around such exhibits. Other such MMA exhibits were highlighted throughout the decade. Marie Ann Toon, former Director of Academic Technologies at Mississippi Institutions of Higher Learning and a longtime member of the METV Board of Directors, took on leadership of METV in 2002. However, it was not to be METV for much longer. In 2003, the public broadcasting entities of Mississippi ETV and Public Radio in Mississippi came together under the name by which it is currently known, Mississippi Public Broadcasting. There was a draw for a new audience in the early 2000s. Though airing sports had been a consideration with tennis in the 1970s, MPB was offered the opportunity to provide coverage of high school football and basketball state championship games, and did so for many years. One might be surprised to find out that MPB's current local radio lineup on weekday mornings was not always a part of the schedule. In 2004, Felder Rushing returned to public broadcasting as the host of a weekly live call-in radio show, The Gestalt Gardener. More locally produced shows joined over the following years, eventually placing Mississippi among the top 10 public radio stations nationally in terms of hours of local programming. One of the best-known recent productions of MPB is Between the Lions. It was a co-production of MPB, Boston Public Broadcasting Station WGBH, and a company known as Serious Thinking. Seasons 5 through 10 were produced in the MPB studios with a team made up of WGBH and MPB staff 2005 through 2010. In the years to follow, the material was worked into a highly successful literacy project which was implemented by MPB early childhood staff in child care centers across Mississippi with the help of Mississippi Rotary Clubs to promote reading readiness. Hurricane Katrina was a game-changer all over the state, hitting the Mississippi Gulf Coast in August of 2005. MPB's radio signal was the only one available immediately following the landfall of the storm, and MPB went into full emergency mode, providing 24-hour live radio and news coverage. Those who called in could find out from MPB staff what highways were open, who to call for various needs, and updates from Mississippi Emergency Management Agency. MPB had all staff serving 8-hour shifts, answering phones, screening calls, researching information, broadcasting, and providing childcare to the staff who needed to bring their children with them to the building. In January of 2006, the series Beyond Katrina chronicled the recovery efforts. On the 10-year anniversary of the storm, MPB produced Rising Above the Surge, the Post-Katrina Coast, which documented the ongoing struggle and the many changes. MPB Radio broke new ground in 2008 by creating an all-music channel. Listeners had the option of MPB Think Radio and the HT channel MPB Music Radio. This was the time that local programs began to fill up the weekdays 8:30 a.m. to noon, with national public broadcasting shows in the afternoon and evening. Music radio featured 24 hours music and music programs. Ed Said burst onto the scene in 2009. Ed, a creation of MPB staff, is a puppet who loves to learn about being healthy and is known for his love of raps and rhymes. Ed is the star of many interstitials, and his public appearances in schools and at festivals are highly anticipated, whether he appears as a puppet or the life-size character. Ed Said is keeping it real and up-to-date by starring in a podcast that is currently in production. In 2011, Ronnie Agnew, longtime executive editor at the Clarion Ledger, stepped in as executive director. The METV-MPB Education Department had long been working with early childhood, promoting reading readiness and assisting both teachers and parents to continue learning in creative ways. With the award of a CPB grant in 2011, and as part of the American Graduate Let's Make It Happen program, the MPB Education Department chose to address the high school dropout crisis in Mississippi. Can I Kick It initiative brought students into contact with each other and MPB staff, as well as some local teachers, to attend a day camp for 2 weeks, discussing the issues and learning to use media to address them. The students made films each summer, focusing on such issues as making right choices during difficult times, overcoming the obstacles to graduation, and serving as positive role models in their schools. Another problem plaguing Mississippians is the infamous Southern diet and its effect on Mississippians' health. MPB addresses this in the series Fit to Eat with Gulf Coast chef Rob Stinson, who teaches ways for viewers to make their favorite Southern dishes in more healthy ways. Southern Remedy had been a weekly show for years on MPB Radio, but in 2011, MPB TV took on the challenge of a Southern Remedy TV series. Featuring Dr. Rick DeShazo of University of Mississippi Medical Center, the show explored such topics as childhood obesity, food deserts, teenage pregnancy, and sports concussions. As the 50th anniversary of many civil rights events approached in 2014, MPB produced award-winning documentaries and interstitials marking the milestones. Among these were Remembering the Freedom Rides, Medgar Evers Remembered, 1964, The Fight for a Right, Fannie Lou Hamer, Integrating Ole Miss, and Freedom Summer. Around this time, MPB TV ramped up its coverage of local musicians of all genres. There were 2 award-winning programs on Mississippi musician Paul Thorne, and a new show, Amped and Wired, which aired taped concerts at such venues as Dueling Hall or Hal and Mal's Restaurant in Jackson. Every year as school reopens, teachers spend a bit of time reviewing their students on the previous school year's work. With the goal of helping children retain and further their learning during the summers, the MPB Education Department began an annual event with activities and vendors. This started in 2014 and was called a Back-to-School Bash. The name changed into Summer Learning Family Fun Day in later years and often saw as many as 1,000 participants. Ken Burns series have long been a popular PBS item, and MPB TV produced documentaries to complement 2 of them. Mississippians in Vietnam, A Shared Experience, followed Burns' well-known series, The Vietnam War. In 2020, Meet Carl Jackson, about the Louisville, Mississippi instrumentalist and vocalist, tagged Burns' series on country music. Taking the directive given to METV-MPB from the start, the Education Department utilized a grant from CPB in 2019 to build a new initiative in workforce development called Getting to Work. A major part of this outreach consists of videos made at MPB and available online about topics such as soft skills needed by those seeking employment. A resume writing workshop and a job fair were highly successful events, and a monthly meeting is held where various private sector employers or state officials can discuss workforce opportunities and challenges with those who attend. As 2020 began, a new governor took office, and MPB-TV and MPB Radio stayed the usual course, covering the inauguration and State of the State address in January. As the country began dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, all of MPB's departments went into action. As schools closed, the Education Department began working with the Mississippi Department of Education, producing materials to be used for students at home. The News Department covered topics surrounding the many aspects of life altered by the impact of the virus. Education, together with radio, added a weekly call-in show, the Mississippi Education Connection, to keep the public informed on developments and to give ideas to parents working with their children at home. Daily press briefings by Governor Tate Reeves were made available to area stations via the live feed provided by MPB's TV crew. Currently, the staff is working diligently with the Department of Education on the new 5th channel of MPB, which was developed for students. Desiring to address the learning loss due to the changes in teaching necessitated by the pandemic, teachers are coming to the MPB studios to record lessons on various subjects for all grade levels. This is designed to specifically aid those students who don't have access to broadband, as they can simply find it on TV without internet or a cable connection. When legislators passed House Bill 78 in 1969, they were aiming toward a plan to benefit Mississippi's children and enrich the lives of adults as well. At that time, they could not have foreseen where all the Mississippi Authority for Educational Television would go. They may have envisioned Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and even something like Pennywise. But clearly the mandate given has led the board and employees of METV-MPB to grow and stretch into this age of websites and social media and podcasts. Through the years of Sesame Street to the creation of DIN, from the radio reading service to Ed Said, from Farm Week to the Gestalt Gardener, public broadcasting in Mississippi is doing, through a variety of means, what it's always done well. And in this, the year of our 50th anniversary, MPB is still here to educate, inform, entertain, and enlighten Mississippians of all ages.